Hi everyone, it's Toby. Welcome to my channel. Today we're doing a little video called Mastering Landscapes. What are we really going to be doing? Well, we are going to be looking at improving our confidence, understanding that we embrace simplicity, then suddenly we can capture what it is about landscapes, which is amazing, which is the mood, the sense of depth, and the general textures and interest, rather than all the little details which we can be too prone to focusing on. When we get prone to focusing on details, we become perfectionist. When we become perfectionist, we get stressed, less happy. So run away from perfectionism and be this guy, be happy. Alongside this YouTube tutorial, I'm launching a Skillshare class, which aims at going into a little bit more depth about the same subject. You can join me below if you like. There's 50 free places. But otherwise, let's just get sketching today. So our scene is up here. This is an image from New Zealand on the west coast of the South Island, where they have these amazing sort of windswept, desolate beaches almost. But within that is so much drama and so much mood, and that is what makes this special. So how are we going to capture that? Well, as ever, it starts with step one, shapes. We need to get the basis of our scene first. So I'm going to look for shapes in our landscape. And what I'm going to find first is this background. We've got this kind of triangle. It's like a long triangle just leading all the way along. But instead of just treating it like a triangle, you need to treat it like a triangle with texture. So I've got my sort of texture of this top of this landscape coming forward. In front we've got, what is the horizon line? The sea, before it then meets the land. Again, where it meets the land, I'm going to just give it some texture to make it more than just a flat line and to show that it's interacting with something here. We can bring that all the way along. And so we've really just split this into, so far, one shape. And then we've got another shape, haven't we? We've got this shape coming along like so. Now, in this reference, we've got a person. That person is my partner. But we're going to leave her out, at least for now, and probably leave her out full stop, because we're talking about landscapes here. And often, yeah, we can add people, but do we need the people? Not really. Often we don't need them at all. And if you do want to add people, then just approach it simply. There's lots of videos I've put up before about sketching people, and it'd just be a case of adding really simple shapes to illustrate that this has got people on it, this beach. But really, this beach is about how desolate it is, how clear it is. So are there any more big shapes to add in? Depends how you think about it, but we could call this this giant grass here, we could call this a shape, couldn't we? And if we're going to call it a shape, what is it? It's kind of basically a circle. The main body of it is kind of a circle, which gets cut off at the bottom. But again, a circle with texture. And then you've got these little fronds coming up. And they're just little triangles or ovals, like wonky ovals. We can just pop a few of those in really loosely. They're quite nice to overlap things. They join up the scenery. You can see actually in the reference they're quite high, but I don't want them way up in the sky. I want them all joined up. I want them to overlap our scenery. I think that's a more interesting way to display them. And all I'm doing is basically treating them as really simple shapes, because this is, as we said, this is about the mood, and the mood can only really be gathered as long as we've kept things simple. We've done this already. These are the clear shapes of our pretty sort of moody and desolate landscape or seascape, and already we can move on to our colours. We'll be coming back with our pen later, of course, because we need to restructure it when we've captured more about what's going on in our scene. Now I'm going to start with this rather lovely sky. We've got sort of very pale blues into deep grey blues, into even some yellow down the bottom. So I'm going to start with the deep blue. I'm going to start with indigo. Now you might use a Payne's grey, maybe with a touch of ultramarine. You might use a moon glow. Lots of different options you could use here. I'm just going to use my indigo, which is a nice sort of shade of that grey blue already. So I'm just trying to get plenty of that indigo on my page, but as splashes, and also as splashes which are kind of following this feel of the cloud already. Underneath that, I'm going to get my nice warm colour. I'm actually going to make it quinacridone. I think quinacridone will give more of a glow. This is quinacridone gold. And then I'm going to drop in a few more dense bits of indigo just in and around. And even a few touches of lunar black, some real sort of granulation to bring in there. And let's see what happens. One last colour, tiny bit of cobalt turquoise just at the top. And now all I'm going to do is just soften those things together. So we've got this kind of random splashing effect, and that stops us trying to paint too much. But if we want some mood, if we want some quick atmosphere, if we just let the colours decide a little bit what they're going to do, then join them up, and just like that we've got rather a fun, moody sky. You can see for some reason we've got some lines joining us here, but I think that's because there's a little granular watercolour here, look, which is drawing on my page. But that's fine, that's just one of the things which happens when you're sketching loosely. And so I'm just going to soften them out a bit. I'm going to leave that little granule alone, and we can come back later if we want to edit that. Now, because we have softened everything, do you see how it's kind of faded a bit? So we've lost some of that drama. But that's fine, we can just come back in. I'm going to use my smaller brush now. And this is all about just gently touching in, little by little, touching in those lovely moody feels, the lovely moody colours. And a bit more of our gold down here, because it is quite a bright gold, isn't it? In reality, quite a bright gold. You might notice I've got a lot of water on my page, and that keeps everything very soft, which for me is quite an important step in making sure that our sky feels realistic and just washes slowly together. And get a little glow peeking out here as well. Kind of imagining that glow coming out behind all these dense clouds. I probably want even more of our indigo down here as well. Maybe trying to find some of these lines in the cloud. And soon we just got to say, you know, we're just doing a simple sky. We don't need to overdo this. So soon we're just going to have to leave this be and see what it does as things sort of settle out. A little bit more of that cobalt turquoise just to bring a little bit more life. And one last go with our indigo. Just touching it and letting the watercolours do their own thing. So very little sort of actual action on my part. Now we're going to come down into the sea. So one thing we want in a landscape is a sense of depth. We want a front, a middle and a back. Now one way of achieving that is with clear line work. It's having light lines at the back and bold lines at the foreground. And we'll be doing a bit of that later. Another is by separating it into clear layers. So we've got this background layer, that's our sky. We've got this layer, which we're going to deal with later. Then we can come forward and add our next layer, which is kind of this lake, isn't it? Now the lake is reflecting the sky. Water, of course, reflects what's above it or is sort of in its view. So what we're going to do is we're going to replicate our sky, but just more gently and more loosely and with probably more sort of brush marks because, of course, with our water we've got those kind of ripples. So it's not a strict reflection. So with that in mind, I'm going to come in with a bit more of the quinacridone and just find where's the quinacridone here. Reflect it down. And then above that quinacridone we go to a bit more indigo, don't we? All of this. So we can reflect that in. And as we get closer, we can just intensify that colour a little bit. Of course, a few splashes will always work in my mind. Now, what I'm not trying to do is replicate what's actually happening in the picture. Because what's happening in the picture is we've got a very dark horizon. I'm taking my own version of this scene. This scene is all about this sky reflecting down from me. That's what gives it that amazing feel. So I'm going to use the reference as my inspiration, but I'm then building from that my own version. And you know what, from a different viewpoint you would get this sky reflecting like this. So I'm not wrong, I might be wrong for this exact reference, but it's for me a perfectly valid interpretation of this scene. Plus we're artists, it's our art, so we're allowed to do, you know, a bit of what we want. Don't forget we've got these little touches of our cobalt turquoise in there. And just getting those reflected down will really just enhance that feel that we've got this sky reflecting into the sea. And there we go. That I'm actually going to call as this sort of layer done. This step, the loose colours, now done. I'm going to let all this dry, and then we'll come back in and we'll add our bolder colours, and we'll see exactly what we're going to try and achieve with a second layer of colours. So we're by no means perfectly dry, but the key areas are touch dry now. And the reason it doesn't matter that it's not perfectly dry is, well, two things. Number one, firstly, I probably want to come in and I just want to make a few touches in here again to get a bit more of this sort of sense of rippling in the water. Now, if we're not perfectly dry, that means we won't be producing lots of hard and obvious lines in our water. We want some hard lines, but we want it in places just to soften and just gently pull together. So just coming in gently, whilst it's still a little bit damp, is no bad thing to do. We can come in and just really get this sort of sense of rippling going forward, and trying to get that sense of these sort of reflections, but also the water moving. In the background, we might just want to do a little bit of the same, but just with some quinacridone. And also being aware that as we get further back, the sense of rippling will get closer and closer. The closer we get, the bigger the sort of ripples are, the bigger the waves are in our vision. Few splashes in there as well, just to keep it bold. Now this is part of the idea that as we get closer to us, colours get more bold, more intense. That might not strictly be true in every scene, because the actual real value of the colour in the distance might be so much stronger than the one in the foreground that the one in the distance is still bolder. But if you had the same apple up close and 500 meters away, the colours in the close apple would be richer. That's the idea that I'm trying to get here. The closer you get, the richer your colours. With that in mind, we can move perhaps into our beach, can't we? Now with our beach, I'm going to just be fairly gentle. And again, I'm going to take liberties with the scene. It's a sort of grey pebble beach, but I'm going to start with something very textured and a bit warmer than that. I'm going to start with this lunar earth and just sort of almost dry brush it in places, and at other places keep it nice and wet. Within that, I'm then going to drop a bit more of our moody colours, a bit more of our indigo. And I'm also going to keep lots of white paper, lots and lots of white paper, because there's lots of light reflecting from the stones in this beach. We don't want to overwhelm everything. But we also want to get that feeling of sort of drama and texture. And with the boldness in mind, if we squint, we'll notice that actually the value of the beach is much higher than the value of the water or the sky. So I now want to just enrich, especially at this point where they meet, I want to enrich the boldness of our beach, and then it can kind of fade out as it gets closer in places. But we can include, if I just move my pen around rapidly like this, not my pen, my brush, we can include some of our highest values as well as having lots of light. So these little random marks, almost totally random marks, are our high value telling us this is in the front. We'll be able, of course, to come back later with ink. As I keep saying, we've got processes to go through, so this is not the end of our process. And ink will as well be able to add a real sense of value. Now what's left? Well, the only thing left untouched is our sort of big grass here. And what colour is our grass? Well, it's a pampas grass, isn't it? So the pampas grass has got mostly yellow, sometimes little touches of green. I'm going to emphasise some of the greens for today. So I'm going to start with gold green, a yellowy green. And I'm going to just touch in to some of these little fronds, some of that green. And I don't mind at all if it sort of spreads out. In fact, in places, I'd rather like it to spread out. I don't want this to be just one source of green overwhelming the image. So a few more touches of this green in a few places. Doesn't need to be in every frond necessarily. And then we can come back in with some yellow. What would be a good yellow? Would be our quinacridone gold that we've already been using. Again, it just means that our sort of, we don't use too many pigments. We don't overdo the sort of visual challenges going on for whomever's viewing our scene. We can also even use some of that lunar earth if we wish, to really amp up the sort of sandy yellow feel. And then I'm just going to really power in some more of this green. Probably a few little splashes around there. And now to balance things out, just a couple of that green splash over here, just to make the scene feel more, what I always say, basically you have to balance the colours. So by having just all this green over here and nothing on the other side, it's too much, it draws the eye too much. But as soon as we balance it out there, and this green could easily be part of our sort of setting sun, it just feels so much more real, it feels more appropriate, it doesn't feel as sort of shoehorned in, as we'd say. Few more little bold lines. Again, remember, this is actually the closest thing in our vision, so we need the colours to be more intense than anywhere else. And we can even just add some more of our indigo to really bring that value out. So there you go, that is step 3 done. Our bold colours, balancing out the colours a little bit. I've left some negative space, been very careful to do that, both big bits and also little bits throughout the image. And what we're going to do in step 4 is come back in with our pen. Now we do need our scene to be mostly dry, and we're going to restructure. We're going to find some depth for this. We're going to find a bit more clarity in our image. And suddenly this sort of heap of madness will hopefully come together. And again, we are mostly dry, more dry than we were before, in fact. So most areas are pretty much totally dry. And that means we can safely come back in with our pen. Now, I don't need to reinforce this horizon line very much, but I will a tiny bit, just in a couple of places, just to give it a little bit of something else. And then as we come forward, we can reinforce some of these sort of areas of negative space, just with a few little scratchy lines. And that's just bringing out the rippled effect and showing that it's different from up here. This line separates sky and sea, or sky and lake rather, sorry. And these little lines just show the texture is different. Coming forward, now I said bold lines come forward, so we probably want to just make this line a little bolder, focusing again on our shapes to bring it just in front of that background and all that intensity of background. We can make something of these little shapes on top of the sort of distant mountain as well, just little suggested bits, added bits of interest going on. And they're not real, but for me they're quite fun, little things which really suggest just a bit more. And they're also nice points of contrast. We can black them in, we can leave them as negative space, and it just pulls things apart. The next thing I'm going to do with my little negative space, and this might be a Marmite love it or hate it type thing, but I'm going to just do some very simple gentle vertical hatching. For me, this separates out layers very nicely. It is a bit of an illustrative thing, so it's like a bit graphic. Some people might not like that quality, but for me it separates out this layer. It shows we've not forgotten it, but it keeps it at the same time as negative space. And it just says, look, that's a thing in the distance which I want you to sort of be aware of, but not really look at. Coming forward then, we need some bold lines. Remember I said you squint and you see that this area is really bold. So now I'm going to press quite hard with my pen, but I'm also going to come backwards and forwards a few times. So we go back and forward, and really, hopefully, through doing that, we create a thick, bold line. If you have a flexible fountain pen, you might find it easier than me to get a really bold line. If you're doing this with fine liners, you might want to change to a bolder fine liner just to amp up that point of contrast. Now, hopefully you can see this is in front of here. So we're really starting to build that depth into our image, not just through the increasing intensity of colour as we come forward, but also through the increasing boldness of line. In our Pebble Beach, what can we do? Well, we can sort of fix some of these white areas of reflection. We can start suggesting stones. We can find little white areas like this and then give it a 3D shape. And now that's a stone, not just a random bit of white. Elsewhere, we can do little dibs and dabs, little dots. This could be another stone here. And all we want to do again is just increase, basically, by increasing the amount of ink in this area, even with a few sort of simple bits of hatching, what we're doing is we're increasing the value of this area overall. We're suggesting details and we're bringing it all into the foreground. We're bringing it to the front of our image. Going back, just getting more and more gentle with those lines until we get all the way to the back, and we want them to fade out, because again, this is actually in the distance. Then finally, of course, we come to our big pampas grass. So we can now really have some fun creating more textures with our ink, finding some of these shapes, finding a bit more sort of these strands, responding to whatever our watercolour's done. And this grass is a bit of a blight in some people's gardens in the UK. I know it becomes huge, but in the sense of this kind of scene, it's got amazing textures to play with and suggest, doesn't it? So it's a real opportunity to just have some fun. And if you're someone who likes using a few day pen, well, this is an absolute dream. Just think of the bold lines, the scratchy lines, all the different things that you could be doing to really elevate this very simple part of the scene. Just have some fun, and if it goes wrong, that's fine. How long have we spent doing this? Maybe 15 or 20 minutes. It's not the end of the world if we ruin it through just being a bit overzealous and having a bit too much fun. We could do some hatching in here as well. Again, the idea to suggest a bit of shape, which we've already got from this light and dark, but also to increase the value and bring it forward in our scene. And just like that, that's the end of this step. And all we've got left is the final step, the finishing touches. And here, I don't think there's too much to do. All perhaps we want to do is just bring out a little bit more fun in a couple of places. We can do a bit more of this green, make it really bold, just give it, respond again to what's happened before, and just see maybe there's a few shapes to touch in. Maybe we want a little bit more light into this sort of pebbly beach. So a few touches of quinacridone, maybe even a splash or two of that green, which is quite a bold, happy colour. And maybe even just a little bit more of this, I've forgotten the name of it, cobalt turquoise, just splashed around, could add a little bit more light. Touch that into the plants just to experiment and see what it does. And I quite like the effect actually, so I'll do a little bit more, and I'll also just spread it into my beach. And just like that, we really are done. So the finishing touches is just about adding a bit more life, a couple of highlights, maybe correcting mistakes or seeing things which you didn't see before. Now I'm going to put my initials on. I'm going to hide my signature somewhere just so I know it's there. And I'm going to call this one done. So your next video is in the comment below, more landscape sketching on YouTube. And thank you very much for watching. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.